Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Breaking Chords, and this is part two of Diminished Arpeggios. And I know in the previous installment, I just kind of talked about, diminished seventh, and also minor seven flat five, and I kind of mapped out, the fretboard and showed some kind of typical and common, shapes and fingerings for these arpeggios. And I know for most guitarists out there, and this includes me as well, the first time I really heard the sound, it was emanating from one, guitarist in particular, and that's Randy Rhoads. And when I heard Randy play, especially like, live performances or, these wicked, guitar solos, you would hear like trills and you'd hear this movement and it caught my ear. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew it was something different. We're going to lock in at the same tonality and the same basic key we were in part one. So we're going to be, kind of floating around A diminished seventh. And with the Randy Rhoads, diminished ideas or arpeggios, that just basically outlines something like this. And there's our G flat, A, C, E flat. And he would basically trill his way through those arpeggios. And those are really good, to practice. So one interesting thing with that arrangement of these arpeggios, when you reach the high E string and you reach that C and E flat up here, there's an interesting thing that happens if you transport, that idea back to the low E string again right there. You can continue and run that same shape again like this. Still the same, diminished arpeggio. It's continued. Once you reach that 8th and 11th fret there on the high E, you can continue that sequence, in the next register or octave on the fretboard. And if you have a 24 fret guitar, you can safely grab a third, area or a position for this. I only have 22, but I can find it like this. And just bend up to that final note, that E flat. Now, one thing that Nuno is known for doing is tapped diminished arpeggios, and I've heard him do this in a few songs and live solos over the years. And that's the same thing. We're going to use that same arpeggio, but then we're going to mirror tap an octave higher. We're going to grab, G flat, C, G flat, C, G flat, and C all the way up. And that would look and sound like this. And depending on how many frets you have and how comfortable you are doing that type of thing, you can find that all over the neck. You can change keys and change positions too. But that's a really cool, kind of unusual, tapped arpeggio. Another thing we can do is we can break that arpeggio in half in a way. We're going to use 4 strings instead of all 6. But that same idea, like when we reached the 8th and 11th fret, and then it repeated again on a low E and we continued up, you can run that 4 strings at a time, and you can still lock into that diminished arpeggio like this. And you can also catch Nuno doing that, and a lot of other guitarists too. But that's a cool little sequence, and once again we're locked into that A diminished 7th tonality. If we go back to that other, extended fingering for this arpeggio, this one. You can do a little string skipping idea in there. It's almost like you're playing leapfrog with those notes, and this is a big challenge. It's something like this. That's a really weird pattern of notes. It's challenging. You're using your index and pinky the entire time. and then you're racing around the fretboard. Another idea you can do, you can kind of go back to what we looked at in the first lesson or in the first episode. And if we grab, the 2nd fret and 5th fret on the G and the high E, and then we basically tap, the E flat and C here on the G and the B string, or I'm sorry, the G and the high E string, you can basically run a tapped arpeggio up those 2 strings like this. It's a really cool lick, and it's a different kind of idea. And I kind of like the idea of racing up those 2 strings, with that tapped idea. Aside from kind of moving around the fretboard with that extended, kind of arpeggio run, we can also lock in to a single position and kind of run, diminished arpeggios. It's almost going to feel kind of like a modified pentatonic scale. So this is something I definitely like to show, my students, and it's something I've worked on quite a bit myself because pentatonics are so common and popular. You can kind of revert this idea into almost like a pentatonic idea. It's not quite pentatonic, but it feels like it, so it's like this. We're missing some notes from the arpeggio, and we're technically only playing 4 notes right there. So right there, it's not quite a pentatonic scale. Pentatonic scales are 5-note scales. That's only 4 notes. The first 4 notes. But it does have that single position, kind of feel like like a minor pentatonic, but it's just a modified, idea. So just like the arpeggios, you can lock into that fingering and move it up 3 frets at a time. And, just basically arrange that diminished arpeggio all over the fretboard. You can run it as high as you want to, but that's a really interesting, kind of modified idea. And you can start that anywhere along that arpeggio. You can start on A, C, E flat, and of course G flat too. All right, now the last idea here is kind of a Paul Gilbert Buckethead type idea, and we're going to string skip. And this is a wide interval string skipping run. And the first shape, we're really just grabbing, a minor third and a minor third on the G, and then a minor third and a minor third on the high E. And there's our G flat, there's our A, there's our C. And we're going to jump over to the high E string and grab E flat, G flat, and A. So it's a big stretch. And if you want to, you can also grab C right there on the 15th fret on the A string. And that gives you kind of a lower note you can skip to. And if you really want to be sick, you could also tap C way up here on the 20th fret on the high E string. Something like that. Okay, the final example here in this episode. Now we're going to basically tap on the 20th on the G and the high E string and just extend it a little bit further. And it totally sounds like something Buckethead would play. It has that wicked, just crazy, sound. All right, that's going to wrap the second look at diminished arpeggios. And if you like these ideas, I can definitely extend this into some other realms and areas of using diminished ideas, because diminished is really cool. It catches your ear, it sounds different. If you're playing, even if your song is just, loosely based around a minor key, you can still slip these ideas in sometimes. It might just be temporarily. But then anytime you do find yourself playing over a diminished chord or like a flat five, interval, you can definitely, gravitate toward diminished and just kind of, sneak it in there somewhere. And then some guitarists use it, a lot. Like, Ingve will just run up and down the fretboard and maintain, like a diminished tonality for a certain length of time. And then usually shifts back to like harmonic minor or something like that. But anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Let me know if you have any luck or any breakthroughs with this, and I'll be back with some more episodes, lessons, and material very soon. Thank you.